The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Welcome to another Leon Charney report, and these are very hard times for anybody who's democratically inclined, for Jews if you want to listen to Mel Gibson, but more importantly for the government of Israel and the people of Israel, because they are in a war, period. That's it. No exclamation points except that it's underlined, a war. And we have with us today Raanan Gissin, who's the former advisor to Ariel Sharon, former spokesman for the Israeli government, and really knows what is happening over there and how it should play out. And we're going to put an hour together now and tell you exactly the background, the foresight, the afterthought, the etc., etc. It's the only show that you'll really find out what is happening and what will happen hopefully in the future. Raanan is not a prophet, but he's been around the yard, as we say, a long time, and he can tell us a lot about what he thinks might happen, and we can bank on his experience. Welcome to the show, Raanan.
Thank you for having me.
I actually saw you, you must just retired from the government about 2-3 weeks ago. I saw you on CNN with Paul Azan about 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that was the end of the line. At the end, just before I left the government when the war already broke out, and I voiced the message that it's the Iranians, stupid, not anything else. And the need to say it as it is, tell the truth about this war. And
what's the truth? Is Israel losing?
No, I don't think Israel is losing. I think this is the real opportunity to complete a job that has begun in '82, and then returned back in '93 and in '95.
The Lebanese war in '82, which Ariel Sharon went forward on. There was a lot of questions about that, whether Begin wanted him to do that war. Do you remember that?
Well, I remember, and there's no doubt that perhaps the preparation for that war, in terms of public opinion, in terms of consensus in the country, as well as international support, let's say in hindsight you can say there was much more that needed to be done in order to complete that operation. And I think the one person that has emulated the lessons of that war in all his future moves after that was Ariel Sharon. And I think today the fact that we are still conducting this war without any hindrance, without anyone stopping us, and the degrees of freedom that the army has is mainly a result of action taken by Sharon.
People forget that basically Hezbollah in '83 attacked the United States Marines and killed a couple of hundred Marines.
Yes,
I think Hezbollah.
I think the writing was on the wall then. And I joke now, I tell to some of my friends that, maybe we didn't read it right because it was not in Arabic and it was not in Hebrew, it was in Persian. And that's the real reality now. That was the first step that Iran has made through Syria in order to build that proxy force and use Lebanon as a theater to launch its war against the West.
But you now have a Persian chief of staff, and you have a Persian president.
Maybe that's a good omen in terms of neutralizing neutralizing the Iranians.
That's possible. Another interesting fact that I brought out on television last week is that Kuti Adam's son is head of Northern Command.
True.
And Kuti Adam was killed in Beirut in a sniper attack, as you all very well know, in 1982. And he didn't have to go there. He was just like scouting the area, sort of just to get some intelligence, because he was then appointed chief of the Mossad. He was 3 weeks into being Mossad chief.
There are many stories that come to a full circle with this war in Lebanon. I'd say the second war in Lebanon, as they call it. But this is the fourth time that we go into Lebanon. We went in '78, to remind you, to the Litani operation, to clean up.
I know it very well. That was through Ezer Weitzman, and I was sitting with him, with President Carter, who asked me personally whether Weitzman would go beyond the Litani, and I had called Weitzman and told the president that that was going to the Litani. So you're talking to a very personal story there. What bothers a lot of people in the United States is the perception that, God forbid, that Israel might not, in a sense, win this war in the public arena. Let's say where you're a genius in media and perception, which is very, very important. Because if the Arab street believes that the Hezbollah perceptively have won this war, then all of the Arab streets around, and even the moderate Arab countries like Egypt and Jordan, Saudi Arabia, who really in the beginning were with you, this is very dangerous.
Leon, you put your finger right on the major issue of this war, of not understanding what this war is all about. You know, we're trying to change reality on the ground. Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, these terrorist organizations, which are proxies of Iran, are operating, concentrating most of their effort at the cost of human life, their own and others, to change perceptions. And the war is over perception. The war over the hearts and minds, as they so call it, the war of the media, over the hearts and minds of people, is what will determine what happens on the ground, more than the military operation on the ground. So while we expend the effort and have the best weapon system to change things on the ground, and we are, in the last 3 weeks, we have
Do you have
destroyed,
any doubts that you'll
we have
win?
destroyed a great deal of their rocket capability.
Right.
But we are not putting enough effort in leaving a mark in their perceptions,
Right.
in leaving that deterrent element when we leave Lebanon. The question has to be phrased, what do we want to be left in Lebanon after we leave? Not only the destruction, but what are the perception? What is the winning picture that Israel needs to leave in the hearts and minds of the people of Lebanon, of the heads of Hezbollah, and the leaders in Tehran and Damascus?
I agree with you 100%. And if the concept of the invincibility of the Israeli army is not perceived as such, it's very, very dangerous for the state of Israel.
Yes.
And I don't know how it's working today. I mean, everybody here is watching television all day and all night. I mean, most people, Fox, CNN, you hear battles, you see battles. I mean, this is a telegenic war. I mean, this is nothing that none of us have ever seen. You and I were together during the Gulf War. It
Yes.
wasn't as telegenic as it is now. I mean, Fox probably has 20 people on the ground there. Maybe CNN has 20 on the ground. One guy is in Tyre, the other guy in Beirut, the other guy in Kiryat Shmona, the other guy in Haifa. It's all telegenic.
It's 20%
And Al
warfare on the
Jazeera, you had
ground,
no Al Jazeera
and
then.
80% strikes against the perceptions of
Right.
people. And we have to learn how to do it. You know, it's amazing to me, as a spokesman, as someone who's been involved in this business for
How many
so
years
long.
you been
24
involved?
years.
24 years.
24 years.
You
And I've
didn't-
been in all the media
Right.
wars.
When you started, there was no Al Jazeera.
No, there was only CNN and Jay Bushinsky
Right.
there, and that's where it started. And my first debut with this media war
Well, you
was the
started in the
CNN in
Army.
Beirut.
Weren't you an Army spokesman originally?
Yes, I
That's
was
when
in the
first-
IDF spokesman.
That's the first when I met you.
And I didn't come from the spokesmanship. I came from strategic planning.
You were a paratrooper too.
Yeah,
if I
they
remember.
pulled me. They pulled me out of Ehud Barak. Pulled me out of strategic planning. He was head of the strategic planning department at the time, and gave me to the spokesmanship and said because media became a strategic issue, a strategic problem to Israel.
Let me play guesses. Abrasha Tamir, Nati Sharoni, weren't they in planning for the IDF?
Yes, at the time I was in planning branch at the time that they were in,
Really?
in
So
the strategic planning.
My memory's working.
field. In the
All right,
strategic
so
planning
then, okay, and you got very close to Arik Sharon, later on became his advisor. Today, would Arik Sharon be playing this war out differently than Ehud Olmert or that government of Ehud Olmert?
Well, to be frank, I think he would do the same, but he would be less hesitant. He would go all the way for the objectives. He would exploit fully the freedom of action that was gained through the very special relations that he established with President Bush and with the United States. And we see it's paying off. We see the president is standing firm and saying no temporary ceasefire, only sustainable one, only after we complete the job. Only after we complete the vacuum cleaning of southern Lebanon so that we don't leave a vacuum afterwards.
Can you do that, by the way? Can the Israeli army clean that area?
Given the time and given the
They have to go
ability
hand
to
to
do
hand, huh? They have to go house to house?
Look, we have to go house to house because of our moral values, not because of any operational constraint. If a different army would have used the 1-ton bombs and leveled whole villages without any consideration of human life, even after you give ample warnings, then definitely it would be easier. But we take casualties because of who we are, because of how we fight, and because of our moral values. And it takes longer. So, to rephrase Clausewitz's dictum when he said, war is the continuation of policy by other means. And people forget to read what he said afterward. And he said, but once you decide to go to war, you got to give the military commander and its forces all the means and ability to carry out the mission until it is completed.
Something that played out here with great anomaly was the fact that the defense cabinet met during the war, and it played out here on the media, and a lot of people sort of were critical of that, because in a war you don't advertise or leak the fact that your defense cabinet is meeting again. And it seemed to be that first this war was going to be in the air, and then all of a sudden they decided, well, maybe they don't have enough ground troops there. And maybe they studied Iraq, where basically the United States probably didn't put enough ground troops in the beginning. Tell me a little bit about what went on there.
Well, first of all, this is a new experience. This is a war in the global village, and we're at the center of the village, the center roundabout of the village,
right,
under a magnifying glass. So all the decision-making process are taking place, in real time, almost in front of the camera,
right,
or a couple of hours after the cabinet makes the decision. And I think not enough thought was taken into integrating the role of the media, not after the operation, not during the operation, but in the planning stage,
right,
before, when you plan it. For example, one of the things that you have to think about these types of war that are wars over hearts and minds of people, wars that are intended to affect perceptions, to create deterrence, is what is the end scenario that you want? And I would suggest to military planners in Israel, take some of the best screenwriters and script writers, Jewish guys around the world who are in the Hollywood business, and bring them to Israel and sit with the military planners and let them think out of a scenario or a winning picture at the end, and then plan backwards and say, this is what we want to reach at the end of the war that will leave an impact. The expulsion of the terrorists from Beirut in '82 was a picture, a formative picture that left an impact. Had the war ended there, perhaps we wouldn't have had to go into Lebanon again. When the Syrians were expelled to the east, and Arafat with 14,000 terrorists was expelled to the west via boats to Tunis, that left a tremendous impact. By the way, I believe that that's what forced the Syrians later on to initiate and carry out the murder of Bashir Jubail, Sabra and Shatila, which was initiated by a double agent of them, Eli Khubeika, and later on, of course, the attack on the Marine barracks in '83.
Sharon got burnt on Sabra
Yes,
Shatila.
exactly.
Technically could never be defense minister.
And that's perhaps, I would guess, that was perhaps one of the reasons that when he became prime minister in 2000 and saw the buildup in Lebanon, had the feeling that he is prevented or would not be able to go into Lebanon to take care of that because of the stigma.
Wow.
Because of the stigma.
That's
I believe this is one of the considerations.
Interesting. We got to cut for a break. Raanan will be back in about a minute and continue our conversation. We'll talk about Iran and how they're muddling in here. I told Raanan, as I've said on this show, I believe that the war in Lebanon is only a prelude or a war against George Bush, and this is the war of terrorism which everybody is fighting today. We'll be right back.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high. To have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the Backdoor Channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels.
We're back. We're talking with Raanan Gissin, who is the former advisor to Ariel Sharon. Guess he still is. Unfortunately, Ariel Sharon is in terrible condition, and a former spokesman for the government and the IDF. So he knows the territory, and he's been in the business 24 years. Who else should we talk to if not Mr. Gissin, Dr. Gissin, about what's going on? Syria, they don't really have an army that Israel thinks that much of it, do they, Raanan?
Well, I think they will make a grave mistakes if they enter the war in one way or another, if they continue, for example, to support Hezbollah. We sent stern warnings to Syria to stop supplying Hezbollah with long-range rockets. You know, the rockets that hit Haifa were 240-millimeter rockets.
Did you believe that
from Syria.
Did you believe, when you saw Haifa being hit, did you believe?
Well, for me personally, you know, yeah, it looked like quite bizarre. You have to remember, I was in Tel Aviv in '91 when Tel Aviv was hit by over 25 Scud missiles that came across from Iraq. On the top of the Hilton Hotel, you could see the trajectory of these missiles coming in.
We have film of you and me there.
Yes,
I was there.
Remember? So, yes, Tel Aviv was hit again, and now with Nasrallah is threatening to hit Tel Aviv again. I believe Israel has been there before. The people of Israel have experienced it, and they're very resilient. You see how the people in Haifa, in Ma'alot, in Kiryat Shmona are standing up. 2 million people are living in underground shelters or had to be evacuated from their homes for the past 3 weeks. That's a country that knows how to fight. And the people, despite the hardship, and it's very painful.
They're united. The people are
and
united.
they tell the government, go complete the job, don't stop.
They did a poll. I saw a poll. About 80% of them say the army is not doing enough. They should go further and do more. That's amazing to see that in the country.
I tell you it in numbers. In '82, there were a demonstration of 400,000 or 200,000, depending, that were against the war. Now you have 4 million people who are for the war.
But the war in Lebanon in '82 was really against Arafat, wasn't it?
Well, it's not just against Arafat. It was, I'd say, to remove the terrorist threat, remove the terrorist infrastructure. Arafat was the symbol. And of course, the expulsion of Arafat was the kind of action that had the perceptual effect, what we wanted, had created that deterrent effect. We lost the deterrent effect because of Sabra and Shatila. But had we ended the war there and we could have stopped it right there, that would have been a great victory.
Did you have any idea that there would be a war? I mean, did you sense it before they kidnapped these kids? Did you understand there would be a war?
Look, for a long time I've been briefing some of the Israeli reporters as well as foreign reporters and pointing out the fact that Iran is planning this new type of warfare.
Right.
And while everyone was concentrated on the nuclear threat of Iran, its uranium enrichment program, the fact that in 5 or 10 years they're going to reach nuclear, I said, don't forget the terrorist arm. It's not the nuclear threat that is a clear and present danger to the Bush administration, to Israel, to the West. It's the terrorist threat. And meanwhile, Iran spread its tentacles around the world. According to CIA report, it supports over 40 terrorist organizations around the world. And Hezbollah was the jewel in the crown, because that was their real success. Not only a terrorist organization that takes orders from Tehran, but a terrorist organization that hijacked a whole country. They didn't have that kind of success in any place in the world. That's why I don't think they're going to give up on Hezbollah right away. And that perhaps will be why they will try to restrain Hezbollah and pull it back so that they can regroup for another round.
So they definitely control Hezbollah. There's no question about that. Now, how about the leader?
Well, first, there's another element here. Syria is the weak link, because without the logistics supplies, without the open border for smuggling weapons into Lebanon, this axis of evil cannot continue to operate.
Right.
So we have to try and neutralize Syria, either by military threats or by political means. And I think here, coordination with the United States is of paramount importance.
Yeah, there's this Tom Friedman wrote this article about how we should make love to Syria because they're ready to make love too. I don't believe it at all. You know, with all due respect to Tom Friedman, he's not a diplomat, and he's never served as a diplomat.
In the Middle East, you don't make love with the Arabs.
Right.
You send them clear messages: don't mess with us. Deal with us if you want, but don't mess with us.
Right. And Syria, you know, the key, I believe, to Syria, I don't think Syria can break from Iran, period. I don't see how they can break. It's like a stepchild. I don't think Iran would let them, because it's too close. And if they have this program of becoming the new leader of a world, and they want to have a nuclear power, and they have a whole program, like the president of Iran said today that the state of Israel should be decimated, right? Destroyed, wiped out. So they need people, they need puppies, they need followers. They are not going to let Syria go so long. If Assad decided to become a Zionist tomorrow, he'd be assassinated in 6 hours. There'd be a military funeral for him in the Syrian territory.
But that's exactly...
He's a captive.
Yes, but that's exactly where we can use the media. As we helped launch this worldwide campaign saying that the nuclear problem of Iran is not just Israel's problem, it's a problem of the world. So we should launch a campaign using all the available media at our disposal with the help of the United States, exposing the terrorist threat, that it's not just against Israel. When Ahmadinejad said that he wants to erase Israel off the map, that's only the first stage. The next stage is to erase the map.
Right.
Erase the map.
Right. He wants to change the world.
And you know, they have in the Majlis, they have a secret committee that is planning the blueprint, step by step, how this is going to be, happen, how terrorist organizations can bring back down Western economies in the Western countries that support the United States and in the United States, and by that, through this chaos, create the new birth of this Islamic republic around the world.
There's no question. I mean, Raanan is absolutely correct. This is not about Israel. This is about converting the world to an Islamic culture, to obedience, I would say. And this is a world fight. I think George Bush really understands that. And what you see here is the American Democrats, they don't criticize George now. I mean Bush. They don't say a word. Maybe his father's angry because he had a different idea, but Israel, in a sense, I think you're right. If you don't believe in God, you got to believe that God sent George Bush to Israel at this moment.
And
I don't know Israel would be without this.
And it's amazing. And you know, with all the criticism against the President of the United States, notwithstanding, Israel enjoys bipartisan support.
Absolutely.
It's the American people.
Absolutely.
You see it in Congress. You see the resolutions regarding Hamas. You see the resolutions regarding Hezbollah. You see the resolutions, the unanimous support that the letter that President Bush gave Prime Minister Sharon in 2004, reaffirming Israel's right of self-defense, reaffirming Israel's right to maintain its deterrence capabilities, that Israel will not return to 67 borders, that Palestinians will have to be settled in their own land. You know, we see today that we have a real ally, and it's very reassuring, you know, because we're alone in this battle, but we are reassured that we stand behind, you know, behind us, someone taps on our helmet. Whether it's the Jewish people in the United States, whether it's the American Congress, or whether it's the President of the United States, it tells us, we're behind you. And I think this is very reassuring to a country like Israel that lives on top of its tsunami waves for the past 58 years.
When will Europe wake up to this fact? When do you think they will wake up? You see French playing games now.
I'm afraid that some European countries are going to wake up too late. You know what's the best kept secret in France?
French fries.
The Census Bureau. No. The Census Bureau statistic that says by the year 2025, if no change in immigration policy, France is going to become
Islamic.
A Muslim nation.
Right.
With a Muslim majority. And I think
Britain is not that far behind, by the way. A little bit, but not that far. If you go
and what we see today is the revenge of the colonies, you know, that came back to France, that came back to England, and now are actually subverting them from within. And if these countries are not going to stand up and fight for their democratic values, for their way of life, like Israel is doing today when it fights in Lebanon, then I don't think there could be any real hope to these countries. And meanwhile, there'll be all sorts of side effects of tsunami waves of hatred, of anti-Semitism, or the new anti-Semitism, which is not against Jews, because that's not politically correct, but against Israel as the epitome of hatred, of what needs to be eradicated. We're living in the 21st century, and you see the war in Lebanon, and you see the reaction in the world. We're the only country in the world that you have a majority of nations around the world that don't care and don't mind if this country will be totally destroyed. No other nation in the world faces this kind of threat.
Right.
When we're fighting in Lebanon, really, it's not just for deterrence. It's not just for the defense of the North. It's not just for the implementation of Resolution 1559, which calls for the deployment of the Lebanese army, removal of Hezbollah. It's for another resolution. It's the League of Nations resolution of 1922 that called for the establishment of a national Jewish homeland. We're still fighting for it because it's not accepted by the world yet.
It's true. What do you say when I say Kofi Annan? What do you say?
Well, you know, Ben Gurion used to say shmoom, you know, that you can't actually take the United Nations seriously. UN, unnecessary. I don't think it's unnecessary. I think it has to play a different role. But unfortunately, some of the leaders and some of the Secretary General is part of it, in it, are being swayed, are being pushed from the charter of the UN, from the real charter of the UN, of the right of nations of self-defense, of the need to fight against terrorism. And recently they just had swayed by, I would say, public diplomacy, by the pressure that the Arab countries are putting on. And to come and say that, you know, Israel is acting in disproportionate manner, you know, when it's defending itself behind its borders, when 3,000 missiles have been launched in less than 22 days, where 2 million Israeli people have to live in underground shelters, when the northern part of Israel is being depopulated, that is disproportionate when we react against those terrorist groups in Lebanon that is threatening not only Lebanon and Israel, but threatening the rest of the world. So, you know, maybe we need a redefinition of what disproportionate means in this age of era when you have terrorist groups that are threatening the life and the viability of democratic states.
I think key players in this international scene are Russia and China. And I say that on the show a lot. I want to hear your opinion about that. Russia have any influence on Iran?
Yes, I think they should, but I think what is needed to be taken here, they're also watching how the West is reacting.
And also,
China is waiting. China is the next big economic power in the world. So they're watching to see.
They have fundamentalists in their countries also.
Right.
Who can become sympathetic, as you say, through the media. They see Al Jazeera pictures every night. They see all these pictures every night. Russia also has about 25 million Muslims in its country. So
it's just amazing how the Russians can say that the Chechnyan rebels are a terrorist organization and Hezbollah is not. When Hezbollah continues to support the Chechnyan there, where Iran is supporting both the Chechen and Hezbollah, where they're trying to promote not only this continuous, sustained terrorist activity against civilians in Russia and elsewhere, but actually to build an ideological framework where these organizations, this group, will take over these countries. So I think, you know, as Tom Friedman once said, you know, until they play this movie at a theater next to you, I mean the terrorist movie, then it doesn't concern you. There's no doubt today that the world is divided between those who support terrorist activity, countries and NGOs, and those who are opposed to it. But regrettably, I must say, there's a large silent majority of nations that sit there and do nothing because they believe that if they just sit quietly, it won't hit them.
And there are a lot of people
in this
country.
In World War III since 9/11. This is only phase 3 of World War III.
Newt Gingrich says we're in World War III. You believe that?
Yes. I say the Lebanon war is phase 3. Phase 1 was 9/11. Phase 2, Iraq and Afghanistan. Phase 3 is Lebanon.
All right, hold. It's tough stuff here. We'll come right back, continue this important conversation with Raanan Gissin. We'll ask him how he thinks things will look 6 months from now. I mean, he's not Isaiah, he's not Amos, he's not Jeremiah, but he is Raanan. We'll be right back.
Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at audible.com or on iTunes. Discover the mystery of the Kaddish. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening, a book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or audible.com.
We're back. We're talking with Dr. Raanan Gissin, who was the former advisor to Ariel Sharon and probably visited the White House with him. Sharon visited the White House sometimes more than Laura Bush. And he was the former spokesman for the government of Israel. He's now retired and is really a media consultant, I guess, all over the world. He's on his way to South Africa to show them what's happening. China, Russia have economic situations with Iran. At the end of the day, many people think that economics is always the answer to world politics. I am not sure anymore, because when you have someone following the Quran in the wrong way, and they become suicidal bombers, and they become ready to die for a cause, I'm not sure economics always works into the paradigm. And with Iran, I don't know. I mean, I had Steve Forbes on a show last week. He's a good man and very pro capitalism. What he wanted to do is have Iran blockaded. Iran has a lot of oil, but they don't have the refineries. And he wanted to blockade them from the refineries. Do you think that that would be a plausible solution to Iran is the culprit right now. Iran and North Korea, and they're playing with each other, by the way. I think there's an axis between them. I don't know, axis of evil, whatever that is, but there's a game going on here. China can curb North Korea tonight because they have a lot of pull there. They can really pull the gun and stop it. They could do it.
Yeah,
they don't.
The two countries.
They don't. Russia maybe has some kind of economic reason or purpose that they could move on Iran. They don't. But they have to wake up, these people. Putin is not an Islamic character. He's, I don't know what he is. I guess he's a non-believer, an atheist, right?
Yeah, but I think what they're doing really is, in a sense, because terrorism is such an effective measure, they are countries that are using terrorist tactics against the West to extort.
Right.
To blackmail, to see how far the West is going. Like a pack of wolves, they smell blood or they smell weakness.
So and they're testing.
And they're testing it. Now, that doesn't mean that they'll bring down, they don't want that yet. But they're testing. So China is testing. Russia is testing. That's why it's so important what Israel is doing right now. It's not doing it just for Israel. No. It's showing that Western countries have the resilience, the capacity to fight back. And what we're asking from the Russians and from the Chinese with regard to Iran is sit back, don't interfere, don't stop the process of using sanctions. Now, about sanctions, it's a different world. Oil belongs to the industrial world. In the post-industrial world, it's information, it's technology. Deny them technology, close it, force more and more unemployment inside Iran, which will bring about the rise of internal opposition. Iran has hope because it has a large middle class, on top of which you have a radical Islamic fundamental regime. Take the top off, and Iran can become a real viable nation, even in the process of becoming a democracy. This is what Bernard Lewis said, that you have several Arab countries who have radical regimes and moderate societies.
Big historian out of Princeton, Bernard Lewis. Hopefully that's true, and hopefully it can work, because what I see when the president of Iran calls for the destruction of Israel, it means he has unemployment. That means he's trying to get his public together with him. I think, I tied into through the back door, and that's his way to bring his public together and hold himself in a position. And employment always, as you go back to Germany, I mean, the stuff that caused the Second World War basically was economics and unemployment. My question is, first of all, how long can Israel hold out with this type of war? And second, what is their end game at the end? Is it to clean out the South, a portion of the South?
Yeah.
How many divisions are playing in there now? I mean, what's going on?
Well, first of all, the military objectives were in the first place limited. I mean, the media didn't quite understand. We didn't intend to actually destroy Hezbollah as a political organization. We wanted to extract its venom teeth. Remove the missiles.
That's very
remove the
important.
missiles.
People don't understand that.
Remove them from South Lebanon. Push them back. Create a sort of deterrent effect, both among them and among their supporters, Iran and Syria, which says, we know your plot, we know your game. We unveiled it. That's why we preempted. Keep them back.
Question to you: how good was your intelligence if you started the war with air, and now you come back and say in the middle of the war, well, we have to put more troops there? Where was the intelligence?
Basic intelligence was good, like the one that the United States had about the buildup. And we knew about the buildup, and we knew about the fortifications. If you ask me about operational, real-time intelligence, I would say that there was more, we needed better intelligence than what we had. And it had to do also with some objective reasons, the kind of organization. We could penetrate PLO. We couldn't penetrate very easily this kind of a religious, compartmentalized organization.
My question to you, Raanan, is sometimes are we too sophisticated with technology in our intelligence rather than having people on the ground where you really miss things? Well, you can have drones, you can have electric eavesdropping, you can have who knows what. You know more about it than I do. Sometimes you really need people on the ground.
I wrote about it, part of my dissertation about the future of command and control, the future battlefield and the future weapon system. And I said that part of the fact that the obsession of using or overusing or misusing technology comes from battlefield traumas that occurred before. For example, we developed our whole, I would say, standoff missile as a result of the heavy blow we received in '73.
You wrote about this?
Yes.
Really?
Yes,
I didn't know that.
And the United States, you know, when engaged in Vietnam after the Vietnam experience, said, well, let's use technology so we don't have to go with troops inside. The sensitivity to casualties among Western nations, Israel, the United States are good examples for that. Created the development of those standoff weapons, or weapons where you don't have to go, start from the air. Where at the same time, you know...
but your enemy also knows that. So exactly. They dug in.
They dug in. And you have to be on the ground in order to get the human intelligence. I would say that as a result of some of those traumas, this is not the only reason, but this is, I suggest this as one thesis. As a result of these traumas in the minds and hearts of politicians as well as commanders, you can ask Colin Powell about this, there is an over-reliance on technology, and therefore the balancing for example, in the intelligence field between human intelligence and electronic intelligence or visual intelligence that you get by other means has been disrupted. I mean, too little human intelligence, too much of that, I would say, electronic intelligence. And the name of the game here in fighting terrorism, in fighting the new type of warfare, is intelligence, intelligence, intelligence. By the way, when the Shah of Iran fell, the United States lost one of its greatest human intelligence gathering stations, which was in Tehran. And to rebuild it afterwards was much more difficult because of the trauma. Because of the trauma of, okay, we'll pull back, we'll use what they call it means of national verification. We'll use satellites, we'll use drones, we'll use other things. I think the balance has to be restored back if we are to make a real dent in this future war, not only on, on what is happening on the ground, but on the perception of those radical Islamic leaders. For example, a daring raid, you know, deep in enemy territory, even if it's just for the purpose of showing them, you know, we can get to you in every place, has a greater effect than bombing them from the air.
Right. A very, very, very tough question for you, and you're out of the government. I don't know how well you can answer it. Would Israel trade prisoners for prisoners somewhere along the line to get those two boys out, and Shalit, the boy from Gaza?
I think Israel traded prisoner for prisoners in the past.
Rusty Lutz, do you remember him? Rusty Lutz, the Champagne spy. I represented him.
Yes.
It was 5,000 to 1. He infiltrated the Egyptian government, if you remember.
And we did some bad deals in the past. I think there's a new situation now. If we are to establish new rules of the game and a new reality in Lebanon, we cannot trade with Hezbollah. Okay? Right. So it has to be a different setup.
Third party.
And perhaps third party, but it has to be something in which we get those three soldiers back safely in one piece, and in the context of an overall agreement, not just in the context of exchanging prisoners, the overall situation changes. But to believe that now Israel will go and trade, and on the other side, Hezbollah will continue to be the one who calls the shot, that will never happen, and Israel will never accept that. In the context of moving towards an overall settlement or some side of a non-belligerency agreement with Lebanon, in which we also solve other issues, then clearly that issue of prisoners on both sides could be resolved. And I'm afraid to say that as a result of that, I don't see a quick solution to the hostages situation, to the three soldiers.
You believe they're alive?
But yes, but at the same time, I believe if the Iranians are in full control of the situation, which I believe they are, most of the elements of this situation is under their control, they'll make certain that they don't make mistakes with regard to these three hostages.
And they'll keep them alive.
Yes.
I hope so. We ran a contest, by the way, a couple of weeks ago, saying who the East German lawyer was who was muddling around during the Soviet times, and his name was, I wouldn't remember his name, and his name was Vogel. And we got a lot of emails, and I sent books to everybody who gave the correct answer. There was an East Berlin lawyer who was very involved with the KGB in making transfers here and there, and I worked a little bit with him to get Sharansky out, if you remember Sharansky, before he was a politician. So what we wind up with is that Israel is trying to put a piece of land together which will have no rockets in it, so that obviously the people of Israel will be safe from, and then they would leave. But now you have to have a multinational unit in there that has force. You can't just have UNIFIL people in there with blue sky caps or whatever they wear. What kind of force do you think is possible? I mean, that's what they're working on now.
It depends how you end the war. You know, policy starts, to rephrase Clausewitz, where the war ends.
Okay.
If you don't know how to end the war with a victory, and victory has to be in the minds of your enemy, you know, perceptions,
right.
Then of course there will be no force that will do the job. Because, you know, if you have to put a force, 10,000, 15,000 men, multinational or UN, that its main purpose is to keep itself in one piece, then they can't keep the peace.
Right,
in other words, if we reach a situation where we have decimated or rendered combat ineffective, that's the military term, of Hezbollah military potential, military capability, then that gives a real chance to this kind of a force to start and restoring stability and peace and be a confidence building measure which will allow Lebanese forces gradually to come and take their place. But if we believe that we'll stop the war, Hezbollah will still have its weapons and its fortification in southern Lebanon, or even beyond the Litani, which will be able to threaten that force will be like sitting ducks. And I doubt very much that there will be many European countries that will be willing to contribute to that force when, as I said, the sole purpose of this force will be to keep itself in one piece. And I think herein lies the reason why the European countries must allow us to complete the job. Let us pull all the chestnut out of the fire so that you don't burn your fingers.
All right, we got to cut for a break. We'll come back with our concluding session with Raanan Gissin. If you don't watch this show, you won't understand what's going on. I promise you. We'll be right back.
Available now over iTunes, Amazon, and Google Play. Leon Charney's cantorial CD and Disco Lam. Listen as Charney movingly sings El Moleh Rachamim and Charney's amazing rendition of a disco remix of Adon Olam, all sung in the incredible and individual Charney style. Also listen to the CDs on Rhapsody. Download Leon Charney's cantorial songs and Disco Lam, the disco remix of Adon Olam on Amazon, iTunes, and Google Play. Or listen in on Rhapsody. All available now.
We're back. I'm talking with Dr. Raanan Gissin, the former advisor to Ariel Sharon, the former Prime Minister of Israel, and he was also chief spokesman for the Israeli government. He's now retired from that position and a media consultant, but I believe he knows what's happening there. You don't forget, Raanan, excuse me. The people of Israel are unified. Are they getting support from America, Jews, non-Jews, in other feelings coming through? I mean, you just left Israel.
Yeah, I've been traveling throughout the United States on behalf of Israel Bonds, on behalf of JNF, or emergency campaigns. You know, we always have it. But I can say that, you know, time and again, through all the wars I participated in, I've been on both sides now, both on the front as well as with our brothers and sisters here in the United States. And I see it's amazing, this sense of solidarity. And, you know, we're talking now, we're taping this program on Tisha B'Av. That's a day of repentance.
Day of fast. Tisha B'Av, I have a lot of non-Jewish audience. Tisha B'Av is called the 9th day of Av, which is Jewish calendar. And 2 temples were destroyed to the Jewish people, first by the Babylonians and then by the Romans, and ironically on the same day. So Orthodox Jews in this country are fasting while we're taping the show. And if you're not Orthodox, you can be sympathetic. And I don't know what you should do because I'm not a rabbi. We're here to tell you what's going on. But you're right. And I remember Menachem Begin coming to this country, and he was here on Tisha B'Av and doing a program on Tisha B'Av and relating the fact that the Jewish people were basically destroyed on this day.
That's it. They were destroyed on this day.
Right.
But at this day, when we're fighting this war, I think maybe we have some good news to the Jewish people. Perhaps 2,000 years later, we understand that in order to survive, we have to stick together. And rather than destruction, perhaps in this day, the lesson that we learn is that through solidarity, we can gain victory. Through solidarity, we can win our battle for survival.
Well, one thing for sure, the United States Congress is totally for you.
United States Congress is totally for us. The Jewish community is for us. The Christian community
is very strong.
And I tell you, my feeling as a soldier, both on the real battlefield and on the media battlefield, where you stand there in front, you stand as a guardian on the walls of Jerusalem, you're the one that shoots all the time, the rest of the column is behind you. You know, when in combat, every time you have this sense that you want to look behind and see if the column is still behind you and you're not alone fighting there. That's the sense that the people of Israel have with regard to diaspora Jews. And I must say, whenever there's an emergency like this war, they come over, they tap us on the helmet, and that reassures us that we are doing the right thing and that we can continue in this war and that we continue to hold on the line until final victory. And when the people of Israel see that kind of solidarity, it's not just the money, but that the brothers and sisters in the United States come and tap on your helmet, tap on your shoulder, we're behind you, then we can do everything and we can win this war as well.
How long, by the way, do you think you'll have to have troops on the ground? You have no idea.
Well, I think more or less we want to do this mop-up operation, or you have vacuum cleaning, I call it, you know, in southern Lebanon. I believe that once we are, the military is satisfied that the whole area up to the Litani is clean from the basic infrastructure of the terrorists there. And you have to understand, every village was a fortified position. Every shelter, every garage became a weapons cache. I mean, and they did it better than the PLO because they were actually accepted in those villages. These are Shiite villages. So we have to go and erase that. And I said it's important so that the political process or the deployment of multinational forces later on will be viable, will be not a temporary thing, but something that will be sustainable over time and lead us to an agreement.
All right. You are a historian by nature also. Ehud Barak, when he was prime minister, pulled the troops out of Lebanon. A mistake?
I don't think so. I think if you look at the benefits of completing the job in Lebanon, I'd say there are 2 prime ministers and 1 president that account for our ability to do the job properly today. Ehud Barak pulled the troops to the international border, which gave us the kind of international support and legitimacy to carry the war up to this point. Ariel Sharon in 2005 from Gaza, and we're fighting a 2-front war, but both wars started from the recognized international border where we were attacked, where our soldiers were kidnapped. And then, in addition to that, we had 1 president who became as the President of the United States, and in 2001, the vortex forces of history propelled him to become the leader of the free world. And he rose up to that challenge, and he stands by us because he understands what we're fighting over there. This is the reason that we have a real opportunity this time, after 4 times being in Lebanon, after 24 years, to finally complete the job and put Iran and Syria back in its place and allow the people of Israel some peace and quiet.
All right, another big question for you. Hamas and Hezbollah, are they working together?
Of course. This is part of a major network. Hezbollah is the ultimate model that they all want to emulate. And if you hit Hezbollah hard enough, And if Hezbollah is deterred, or Hezbollah ceases to be a military organization, the predicament of Hamas will also follow, and Islamic Jihad. They are Hezbollah is the model. And I think that is why it's so important to score a real victory, to affect the perception of the leader of Hamas, of Khalid Mashal in Damascus, of the leaders of the Islamic Jihad, and of the leaders of Tehran, to say, well, you got to go back to the drawing board and think again how they're going to fight the Israeli nation.
What did Arik Sharon think about Abbas? What did he feel about him?
Well, I think basically that, you know...
Did you meet Abbas with him?
Yes, I met several times, you know, that,
and what do you think
when he was foreign minister. Look, he's definitely a good guy, if you want to say, to use the term. He has good intentions, and he really understands that the predicament of his people lies in dealing with Israel, not messing with it.
But he has no power.
That's it. And so maybe this new condition that will take place here in the Middle East will propel him to a position where, with the help of some of his Arab friends, who will fear Iran more than they fear Israel, or the invasion of Iran more than they fear Israel, we will be able to start a change in the Middle East. I think that's the real hope. Whether that will work out or not, we have to wait at least a couple of months to see how this war works out.
All right, let me play a little bit of military games with you, and they're not games. Do you believe there'll be a military conflict within the very near future between Iran and the United States?
Well, I think not if the United States is determined and takes the necessary steps to impose the sanctions within the next year and a half or 2 years to bring the mounting pressure on Iran, then that kind of a conflict could be avoided. But if no action is taken, and finally we are faced with this dual threat of Iran, what's nuclear weapons, and the I would say, worldwide terrorist campaign against the West, the kind of military confrontation may be unavoidable or inevitable. So it depends very much what kind of political action the coalition of the axis of good are going to take against the axis of evil.
There's always scuttlebutt talk in the United States that Israel will take out those nuclear weapons. I don't think that's a possibility.
It's not a possibility, and Israel is not going to act like Mikey in that commercial, that it's going to taste everything and let others, you know, look what it's doing. As with nuclear weapons, so with the terrorist threat. This is a problem that the world must face together. This is a problem that requires a broad coalition of Western countries who are fighting and trying to make life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness self-evident to all of them, not just to the people of the United States. And for that, in this new, brave new world, you have to stand and fight. And Israel is setting the example.
Are you satisfied with Tony Blair, the way he operates? And is are the Israeli...
Yeah, I think Tony Blair is a good friend and an ally.
I think he's done terrific things.
And a terrific job. And look, you need a lot of courage, because when a great deal or a great number of your colleagues and your nation and even within your party are criticizing this policy. I mean, this is the age in fighting terrorism where true characters of leadership are necessary, because leadership can determine.
So that brings me to another
question.
question. Had Assad's father been living, who was a very practical guy, and you basically had a de facto peace with him up in the Golan, do you think he would have had a different perception of how this world should look over there with Lebanon, or do you think you'd have the same colors?
Well, I think he would go with Iran for a while. I think, and
he was a stubborn guy, though.
Yes, but up to a certain point. But if you offered him an offer he couldn't refuse, I think it was possible to make a deal with Assad. Definitely more than with his son, which is controlled, I would say, not just by Hezbollah, but by the militants in his own government.
Jews today are confronted by Israel having a tough time by, you've been in the United States, by this Mel Gibson character who blurts out terrible anti-Semitic remarks under alcohol, which people say is always the truth. There's a feeling amongst some people here that anti-Semitism plus anti-Israel vehemence can cause a real feeling of desperation amongst the Jewish people. I mean, this is not so far-fetched. You know, the American Jew in Seattle 2 weeks ago, some radical guy went in and I know they killed a woman in a synagogue. You've been around the world a lot. You've seen Jews here. You've seen Israel again. Tell my people who watch this show, both Israel and Jews and non-Jews, how they should be feeling today with all this.
I say it in very simple terms, and I use the metaphor I used before. When they come to Israel and tap us on the helmet or tap us on the shoulder, it's very reassuring for us, but it's also very reassuring for them. Because when they come there and they realize and implement their birthright, they come back, they know that Jews have to stand up and fight for what they believe in, have to stand up and fight for the right to live like a normal people, like a normal nation. Not with the help or not with the charity of the rest of the world that will say, when the Jews cower, but stand up for your rights. And that they can get only when they come to Israel. Only when they tap us on the helmet, when they tap us on the shoulder, when they come there, they can come back to the United States and say, I've seen it, I've been it. That's what I want to do. That's where I want to be. And stand up and fight. And you know, the battle today, the battle lines are drawn all over the world. It's not on the ground. It's in the airwaves.
Right.
So Jews have to stand up and speak out. And Jews have to put their money where their mouth is and do the job. And then the Jewish people will prevail.
You've heard it all from Raanan Gissin. He ends Tisha B'Av with a hopeful note that if you just do some helmet tapping, you're going to feel better, and Jews will get over this depression that they're being sort of attacked subliminally or blatantly and latently. And so if you get really depressed, play this tape again and you'll overcome your depression. We'll see you next week.